It is one of the more scarier things about inspecting your hive. Every time I open up a hive, one of the things that I'm really looking for, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I never see it because it is deadly. It will destroy your colony. We think varroa mites are hard to deal with, small hive beetles are hard to deal with, but this one, it is the mother lode of all diseases that we really do want to avoid. It's American foul brood. American foul brood was kind of first coined or discovered about maybe 1906. And it is a brood disease, a bacterium that gets into the brood. Actually, nurse bees will transfer those spores around when they're feeding very young larvae, and that's how the young larvae contract it and they get it in their gut, and that bacteria just spreads rapidly, and those spores multiply like crazy by the millions and get transferred and tracked around all through that hive so quickly. And so in most states, to tell you how bad it is, most states require that you burn the entire hive. I'm talking beads, boxes, frames, top cover, bottom board. They want it burned and buried. That's how you just don't want to get this. Now here in Illinois, that's what's required. If you get it, fingers crossed, so far I've never had American foul brood. Now I have seen American foul brood frames once when I was taking my master beekeeper test with Eastern Apicultural Society. They had a frame of American foul brood and they were using it to demonstrate what it is and test us on it. And it smelled so bad. It was in the room with us while we were taking the lab tests of all these other things that we were supposed to identify. I about lost my cookies. It smells that bad. So let's talk about American foul brood, because again, I kind of hate talking about it because I know some of you are thinking about becoming beekeepers in next spring. And already I'm telling you something very scary and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to do beekeeping now. But listen, even though it does happen, even though it is something that we need to be aware of, it is not something you're going to see, hopefully, as much as we do all the other things that we have to deal with. In fact, one time I remember reading that in Illinois, we had about a 2% cases of American foul brood in the whole state. So it's one of those things that's not that common, but we do see it pop up from time to time. So we need to know how to look for it. We need to know what it looks like, how to identify it. But more importantly, what I'm excited and pumped to share with you guys is we need to know how to prevent it. Can it be prevented? Well, there's measures we can take to greatly cut down on actually getting American foul brood. So I want to share that with you. Let's get right into talking about how to identify it. Now, obviously, bad smell. I don't know how to describe the smell. Some of you have smelled goldenrod in the fall. That is a good smell compared to American foul brood, even though that smells kind of funky. I'll tell you what, American foul brood to me, it smells like rotting fish. It's just, it's rotting larvae that are in the comb, and it's just a horrible smell. It's the bacteria eating away at that larvae, that pre-pupal stage of the bee, and it's just an awful odor. Now, sometimes you may not smell it because American foul brood could just be in one or two cells. So you may not really have the quantity of it throughout all the different cells. So it doesn't always mean you're going to smell it. Sometimes you will be able to see it. So what are we looking for when we examine a frame of brood? Well, that's the first thing. It's going to be found only in the brood, not going to be in your honey, not going to be in other frames. So you want to see it in the brood. What will the brood look like? Now, remember in a video or two back, I showed you one of the frames. I made a video for you guys who haven't seen it, how to identify and how to read your frames. And one of those videos, I pointed out that a couple of the cells were open. They had perforations. I mean, a little hole at the top of these cells. And so I explained that we don't always want to panic when we see that. There may be other reasons bees are making little holes in the brood. Sometimes it's a hygienic behavior. Sometimes they're capping it over. They're not finished yet. But in this case of American foul brood, one of the symptoms is perforated brood. And that's because the bees are chewing that little cap open because they detect something is bad underneath it. They're trying to be hygienic and clean it out. So you'll see a lot of perforated brood, holes in your brood. Another symptom is you're going to see a greasy looking surface on top of the brood. So it won't be smooth, velvety, dry looking. It's going to be more greasy looking. Another characteristic is that you're going to see a spotty brood pattern. You're always going to see spotty brood with American foul brood. It's just not going to look like a good solid brood pattern. And then also what you're going to be able to notice if you look very carefully are the scales. Now, scales are simply another word for the larvae, the prepupa stage that's been infected by the larvae, and it begins to melt down on the bottom of the cell. Now, a lot of people are confused about what the bottom of the cell is or the back of the cell. And the best way to describe it is for me to draw you a picture. So this is important to understand another symptom that we can detect American foul brood. Now, let me draw this out for you. This is looking down the side of the frame. So in other words, this would be the cell bar that kind of spreads out at the top and goes down. So we're looking down. So what I'm going to show you is important. Now get this, you may not have heard this, you may not believe me, but this is true. But I'm going to draw a cell. Now I'm going to make it a lot bigger so we can kind of get an idea of, cells are angled, I think at about a 13 or 14 degree, just so stuff doesn't fall out. So normally we look into the cell like this, and it's hexagonal. So the opening of the cell kind of rolls through like something like this. And, I'm just kind of, I'm a terrible drawer, but here is the opening of the cell right here. So when the queen backs into the cell, she would lay an egg right here, right? All right, so this is actually called the back. This is the back of a cell. We would say the egg is on the bottom of the cell, but that's not really accurate. This is the bottom of the cell right here, because that's bottom to the bees. Now it's bottom for us when we hold it sideways and look into it. I see why we say bottom, but so this is important to understand a symptom of American foul brood, because this is the top of a cell, a single cell on a frame. This is the opening to the cell that the queen would lay that egg in. As the egg gets older and becomes a larvae on day 3, then what happens, nurse bees begin to feed it, and the nurse bees are responsible for carrying these American foul brood spores around. So as this larva gets more developed and older, it begins to be so infected that, look, it goes to the bottom. It dies and just melts into this goo. It's called a hard scale, but it's on the bottom of the cell. That's why I wanted to tell you what the bottom is. I didn't want you to think it was this. This is the back. So this deceased, this dying larvae is sitting there like this, all infected with the bacteria, and those spores grow by the millions. And so when a nurse bee tries to feed it, it's just spreading more and more of those spores throughout your hive. Sometimes there's a tongue that sticks up a little bit, and that's one of the symptoms, although it's not as present as most people think in American foul brood, but sometimes you can see a tongue sticking out like that. But this is a dead larvae prepupal stage where it has died in a cell. Now, when you hold a frame up and look like this, you might think it's a perfectly good frame. You may not see this deceased infected larva on the base, on the bottom of that cell, because you just look in like that, see, and you won't see it. So you have to look at an angle like this that allows you to see them more. And you'll actually probably see them sticking up a little bit, even at the top of that cell wall, you'll be able to see that more. An example is a picture right here of that hard scale. So let's go over some of the images so you can identify what we have with American foul brood as symptoms. Now, before we get into these images of American foul brood, let me encourage you guys to please subscribe to my channel here. It means so much to me. When you click on the subscribe button, click on the bell, you'll be notified each time I make valuable content like this. I don't want you to be left behind. The first thing you're going to notice is a spotty brood pattern. And as you can see here, there's a lot more open cells than there are closed cells. So spotty brood pattern. And in this image, you can see sunken brood. That means that the brood, rather than being solid across the top, it's going to be sunken or collapsed. That's another sign of American foul brood, something to look for. And also where we have the perforated cap brood, as you can see here. a good sign that bees are opening that up because there's a problem underneath of it. You're going to see a lot of that. Again, you're going to see this occasionally in healthy colonies that are especially hygienic in nature. But in this case, this is a prime example of perforated brood for American foul brood. Here in this image, you can see the arrows are pointing to the larvae that have been infected with American foul brood, how they are dying and they're dead in those cells. And it's a good example of what they look like. Again, these are on the bottom of that cell. So put it all together, all the symptoms together, and this is what you're going to see. See how it looks kind of greasy, the brood on top? You got perforated brood showing. You also have the dying larvae on the bottom of the cell. You also can see some of the scales, as you can see in this example here, what I was telling you about earlier, how the larvae is so infected, it's dying, it's hardening, it's on the base, on the bottom of the cell. And so you can detect those cells as well. Sometimes you can see the tongue sticking out. Always remember that in the larvae, when they're in a pupal stage especially, they're facing up. So it sometimes looks like their tails are up because their heads aren't developed yet. But in this case, you can see sometimes their heads are the smallest part before they're maturing of that larvae, and you can see that tongue sticking out. Now, if you're not sure, there's always a way for you to do a field test to see if it's American foul brood. Maybe you're seeing some spotty brood, maybe you're seeing some sunken brood, greasy brood, perforated brood, and you smell something. You can take a toothpick and push it down into and open up one of the cells that are capped over or one that's perforated and stir the contents of that deceased larvae up. And as you pull it up, as you can see in this image here, if it ropes, if the content of that cell follows that toothpick up ½ inch or more, then you know that's likely American foul brood. And also notice when you do pull it up, it's going to have this brownish caramel color to it. All larvae like this should always be pearly white, so that's another indication of American foul brood. Well, that's the bad about it all. Now, how do we prevent American foul brood? It can be transferred around by robber bees. So one of the ways we want to be sure is to reduce robbing. Hives that are infected with American foul brood can send their robbers over to our hives to rob and start robbing our hives, spreading those spores around. So reducing robbing is a big thing. It can be transferred by your hive tool, equipment, transferring one frame to another hive, something that I practice a lot when I know that my hives don't have American foul brood. So before you go swapping hive tools, boxes, especially between different apiaries, but especially different hives, make sure when you're moving frames to other hives that they are healthy brood. Also, it's probably a good idea, if you can afford it, to always buy new equipment. Sometimes in buying old equipment, we may be buying equipment that's infected with American foul brood. Now, it can live 50, 60, 80 years in old equipment stored in barns at cold temperatures. And so that's something to be concerned about. It might be always more advantageous for us to buy new equipment, especially when it comes to frames. This is really some good stuff. I know it's a little bit deeper than what I usually go into, but I want you guys to be aware of what to look for in searching your hives when you do your inspections. Make sure you don't have American foul brood. And this is in a series that I'm teaching you guys what to look for in frames. And if you didn't see the video that started all of my inspection techniques on looking at frames, knowing how to read frames, take a look at this video right here. I'll see you guys over there.